Picture this, you're 15 minutes away from marrying a billionaire. The dress is perfect. The baby is kicking. 300 guests are waiting. Then you grab the wrong phone and see a text that changes everything. Can't wait until this circus is over. The baby was just the key to her father's company. Claire Morrison thought she knew betrayal. She had no idea her entire relationship was a 10-year con, that her fiancé had been planning this since she was 18, that her best friend was in on it, that even her father's death might not have been an accident. What happens when a pregnant bride decides to fight back against a billionaire who's always 3 steps ahead? You're about to find out. And trust me, Betrayal, you won't see the ending coming. If you love stories about justice, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me, would you expose him at the altar or run? Let's dive in. The wedding dress felt like a cage. Claire Morrison stood in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, her hands trembling as she adjusted the lace veil that had belonged to her late mother. At 28 years old and 6 months pregnant, she'd imagined this moment would feel like a fairy tale. Instead, her chest tightened with an anxiety she couldn't name. The suite was everything she'd dreamed of as a little girl in Ohio. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across ivory walls. White roses filled every corner, their perfume mixing with expensive champagne waiting on ice. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like a promise she was no longer sure she believed. "You look absolutely stunning," her younger sister Rachel said, smoothing the silk train that pooled across the marble floor. "Blake is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Claire forced a smile. Blake Sutton, billionaire tech mogul. The man who'd swept her off her feet 18 months ago when she'd planned a charity gala for his company. The man who'd proposed the moment she told him about the pregnancy, dropping to one knee in a restaurant so expensive she'd been afraid to touch anything. The father of her unborn daughter. The man whose phone she was currently holding. It had been an accident. Their phone cases were identical. Black leather with gold trim. A gift from Blake. He'd said, so they'd match. Now she wondered if that had been intentional too. She'd reached for hers on the vanity and grabbed his instead. The screen had lit up with a text message from someone labeled work. "Can't wait until this circus is over. Your bed or mine tonight." Claire's vision blurred. Her fingers moved without permission, scrolling up through the message thread, months of texts, photos that made her stomach turn, explicit conversations that proved this wasn't some recent mistake or moment of weakness, declarations of love that mirrored everything Blake had said to her, and worse, a message from 2 days ago. "Once the merger with Morrison Industries goes through, we're free. The baby was the key to her father's old board trusting me. After tonight, she's nothing but a useful signature." The phone slipped from her hands, clattering against the marble floor. "Claire," Rachel rushed over, champagne glass forgotten. "What's wrong? You're white as a sheet." Claire couldn't speak. Morrison Industries, her father's company. Tom Morrison had died 10 years ago in a factory accident, leaving behind a struggling manufacturing business held together by his old friends on the board. Men who'd bounced Claire on their knees as a child, who'd attended her high school graduation, who'd wept at her father's funeral. Claire had walked away from it all, choosing event planning over corporate politics. She'd wanted to build something of her own, something that wasn't shadowed by grief and responsibility. She'd had no idea Blake had been circling the company like a vulture, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Sis, talk to me." Rachel picked up the phone, her eyes widening as she saw the screen. Oh my God, Claire." The baby kicked hard against Claire's ribs, as if sensing her mother's anguish. Claire's hand moved instinctively to her belly, to the life she'd created with a man who'd apparently been using her from the very beginning. "He planned this," Claire whispered. "All of it. Meeting me, the romance, the pregnancy. He needed me to get to my father's company." Rachel's face flushed with rage, her hands shaking as she scrolled through more messages. "We're leaving, right now. Forget the 300 guests out there. Forget the cameras and the reporters and all of it. We're getting you out of here." But Claire's mind was already moving in a different direction. She thought of her father, who'd worked himself to death trying to save jobs in their Ohio hometown, who'd chosen his workers' livelihoods over his own health, staying late at the factory every night until his heart finally gave out. She thought of the board members who'd watched her grow up, who trusted Blake because he was marrying Tom Morrison's daughter, because family meant something to them. She thought of every woman who'd been used, manipulated, and discarded by powerful men who faced no consequences, who were called crazy or vindictive or gold diggers when they dared to speak the truth. No, Claire said quietly. I'm walking down that aisle. Are you insane? Everyone needs to see who he really is. Claire's voice hardened as she met her sister's eyes in the mirror. Hand me your phone. I need to take screenshots of everything. Rachel stared at her sister as if seeing her for the first time. The gentle, accommodating Claire who'd spent her life smoothing over conflicts and making everyone comfortable was gone. In her place stood someone Rachel had never seen before. Claire, what are you going to do? Claire began methodically photographing every message, every photo, every damning piece of evidence. Her hands were steady now. The tears had dried. Something cold and focused had taken their place. I'm going to destroy him. The orchestra began Pachelbel's Canon in D. The doors to the grand ballroom opened with theatrical precision. Claire stepped into view. 300 faces turned toward her. Politicians whose campaigns Blake had funded, tech moguls who'd partnered with his companies, celebrities who'd accepted his donations. The cream of New York society gathered to witness what was supposed to be the wedding of the year. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, blinding and relentless. Blake stood at the altar in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his movie star smile firmly in place. He'd spent an hour that morning with his stylist, making sure every detail was perfect for the photographers. Beside him, his best man Greg Mitchell looked nervous. Tugging at his collar and avoiding eye contact with the crowd, Claire walked slowly down the rose-petal-strewn aisle, her hand resting on her rounded belly. The dress she'd designed herself, pouring weeks into every detail, now felt like armor. Every step felt like wading through water. She could see Blake's expression shift from confidence to confusion as he registered something wrong in her face, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she held herself. The whispers started halfway down the aisle. Is she okay? She looks pale. Do you think something's wrong with the baby? Maybe cold feet. Poor Blake. Claire reached the altar. The officiant, a small man with wire-rimmed glasses, who'd married 3 generations of Manhattan elite, cleared his throat and began, Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union. Stop. Claire's voice cut through the hall like a blade. The officiant blinked rapidly, his prepared speech dying in his throat. Excuse me. I said stop. Claire turned to face the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto her, the varying degrees of confusion and concern. She could see Rachel near the back, phone raised and ready, positioned exactly where they'd planned in those frantic 5 minutes before the ceremony. Blake's hands shot out, gripping her wrist with enough force to hurt. Claire, what are you doing? His voice was low, dangerous. Nothing like the charming billionaire the world knew. She yanked her arm away. Blake Sutton is a liar, a cheat, and a con artist. The gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing against shore. Someone dropped their champagne glass. It shattered against marble with a sound like a gunshot. Baby, you are not feeling so, Blake said smoothly, his smile never wavering as he turned to address their guests. The pregnancy has been difficult. Let's go somewhere private and… Rachel, the screen. Her sister nodded once, sharp and certain. Within seconds, the massive projection screen behind the altar, meant to show a carefully curated slideshow of their relationship, flickered to life with very different content. Text messages appeared, dozens of them. Screenshots of Blake's conversations with someone named Jenna Pierce. Intimate messages that left no room for interpretation. Explicit photos from a vacation in the Maldives, taken the same week Claire had been bedridden with morning sickness so severe she'd lost 12 pounds. The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts of surprise, gasps of scandal, the click and flash of phones capturing every moment. This woman, Claire's voice shook but held steady as she pointed to the screen, has been sleeping with my fiancé for months. But that's not even the worst part. She advanced on Blake, whose perfect mask was finally cracking at the edges. She could see panic flickering in his eyes, see him calculating his next move. You want to know why he's really marrying me? Because I'm the daughter of Tom Morrison. Blake has been planning a hostile takeover of Morrison Industries for years. But the board wouldn't approve him. They didn't trust him. They only agreed when he became family. Another screenshot appeared, an email from Blake to his lawyers, dated 3 months earlier. Pregnancy accelerates timeline, on the board sentiment softening significantly. Morrison merger, 90% likely post-wedding. Proceed with acquisition papers. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Is this true, Sutton?" Another voice, "Tom, Morrison was a good man." "Did you really?" Blake's face transformed in an instant. Gone was the charming billionaire philanthropist. What remained was something cold and calculating, a predator whose prey had just bared teeth. He grabbed the microphone from the stunned officiant. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you have to witness this." His voice was pure concern, pure empathy, the performance of a lifetime. Claire has been struggling with severe prenatal depression for months. Her doctor recommended we postpone the wedding, but she insisted. "I've been trying to support her through this mental health crisis." "But that's a lie," Claire screamed. "These paranoid delusions about my colleague Jenna Pierce, these doctored text messages, it's all part of her deteriorating mental state. I've been trying to get her professional help, but she refuses treatment." The energy in the room shifted like a physical thing. Claire could feel it, could see doubt creeping into faces that had been sympathetic moments before. This was what power looked like. This was how the narrative changed. From the crowd, a woman in a blood-red dress stood with perfect timing. Tall, poised, with razor-sharp cheekbones and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jenna Pierce. "I'm Blake's corporate attorney," Jenna said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, every word carefully chosen, every gesture rehearsed. "These messages are completely taken out of context. I've been helping Blake manage Claire's episodes for months. She's been sending me threatening messages, accusing me of impossible things. We've all been very concerned." The crowd's energy shifted again, murmurs of understanding, nods of sympathy. For Blake, an older woman with silver hair and a diamond necklace, worth more than most people's houses, stood with the authority of old money. Blake's mother was Nora Sutton. "My son has been a saint," Nora declared, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Putting up with her instability, her wild accusations, her mood swings. We've all been walking on eggshells for months, trying not to upset her. For the baby's sake," Greg, the best man, nodded vigorously. "I told you she was unstable. Man, remember last month when she accused you of—" He caught himself, letting the implication hang. "Should have listened to me." The whispers turned venomous. "Pregnancy hormones make women crazy. Gold digger trying to destroy him when she doesn't get her way. Poor Blake, trapped by a pregnancy. Someone should call child services." Security guards in black suits began moving toward the altar, their intention clear. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. The baby kicked frantically, as if trying to escape. She'd walked into a trap. Blake had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. "Miss Morrison, we need you to calm down," a guard said, his hand firm on her arm. "Get off her," Rachel shoved through the crowd, but more security blocked her path, professional and immovable. Claire looked around wildly. 300 faces stared back, most with pity. For Blake, the man who just publicly destroyed her credibility with a few well-chosen words and carefully positioned allies. He'd won. He'd actually won. Blake leaned close, his breath hot against her ear, his voice a whisper only she could hear. "You really thought you could beat me? I own this room. I own this city. I own judges and journalists and everyone who matters. And soon I'll own your father's company and our daughter." His hand moved to her belly, possessive and threatening, a gesture that looked protective to the cameras, but felt like a claim of ownership. Game over. Claire. The bridal suite felt like a prison cell. Claire sat on the floor in her wedding dress, the expensive fabric pooling around her like a deflated parachute. Mascara streaked her face in dark rivers. Her carefully styled hair had come undone. She looked like the unstable bride Blake had painted her as, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Rachel paced frantically, phone pressed to her ear, making call after call while Claire stared at nothing. "I've called 5 lawyers, Rachel said, voice tight with frustration. 4 won't touch it. They all have connections to Blake or his companies. The fifth wants a $100,000 retainer we don't have. Claire stared at the wall, tracing patterns in the wallpaper with her eyes. Through the door, she could hear the party continuing. Blake had salvaged the evening with remarkable skill, spinning her breakdown into a touching story about standing by his troubled fiancée despite her mental health struggles. The band was playing, champagne was flowing. 300 guests were celebrating a wedding that never happened, toasting a groom who just publicly humiliated the mother of his child. Her phone lit up on the vanity. Then again, and again, notifications flooded in like a tsunami, each one a small violence. "Don't look at those," Rachel warned, but it was too late. Claire had been tagged in hundreds of posts. Videos from the ceremony were already viral, shared thousands of times in the hour since it happened. But they'd been edited, cut to make her look unhinged. The screenshots she'd shown had been cropped out of most clips. All that remained was her screaming accusations while Blake looked concerned and patient and victimized. The hashtag trending #1 worldwide crazy. Bride NYC. The comments were savage, each one a small cut that together felt like bleeding out. Gold digger tantrum. LOL. Bet she trapped him with that pregnancy. Blake Sutton is a saint for not running. Someone get this psycho away from that baby before she hurts it. Women like this are why men are scared of marriage. She's probably lying about the pregnancy too. Anything for attention. Claire's hands shook so violently she dropped the phone. It landed face up, still lighting with new notifications. New judgments, new ways the world had decided she was the villain. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "I showed them proof. I showed everyone." "He controlled the narrative faster than you could," Rachel said grimly, finally ending her latest call with another rejection. His PR team, his lawyers, his money, they buried the truth in minutes. Claire Billionaire. By tomorrow morning, every major outlet will be running his version of events. Anonymous sources will come forward with stories about your instability. Your past will be rewritten. "I don't have a past. It doesn't matter. They'll make one up." A knock at the door made them both jump. "Process server," a bored voice called. "Open up or I leave it with hotel security." Rachel cracked the door just enough to see a woman in a courier uniform, already turning away, shoved a manila envelope through the gap. Claire opened it with numb fingers. The legal letterhead swam in her vision. Emergency restraining order. Blake Sutton versus Claire Morrison. Her vision tunneled as she read the words, each one a nail in the coffin of her life as she'd known it. Respondent has exhibited signs of severe mental instability and has made threats of self-harm. For the safety of respondent and unborn child, the following restrictions are imposed effective immediately. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation within 48 hours. Surrender of passport. No contact with Blake Sutton or Jenna Pierce within 500 feet. Violation will result in immediate arrest and emergency custody hearing. "How is this legal?" Rachel grabbed the papers, reading them with growing horror. "He's the one who cheated. He's the criminal. How can he get a restraining order against you?" But Claire understood with the clarity that felt like drowning. Blake had filed this before the wedding, probably days before. While she'd been taking screenshots and planning her exposure, he'd been building a legal fortress, preparing for every possible response. The man who'd planned a decade-long con wasn't going to be undone by text messages and righteous anger. She'd played checkers. He'd been playing chess with pieces she didn't even know existed. Her phone rang, her business line, at 9 p.m. on her wedding night. "Hello. Miss Morrison, this is Jennifer Parker from Elegant Events magazine. We're running a story about today's incident and wanted to give you a chance to comment on allegations that you've been fired from 3 previous event planning positions for erratic behavior." And Claire hung up. That wasn't true. None of that was true. She'd never been fired from anything. But by tomorrow, it would be published as fact. Anonymous sources would confirm it. Her entire professional history would be rewritten to support Blake's narrative. The second wave of pain hit at 11:30 that night. Claire doubled over, gasping. Hot liquid ran down her legs, soaking through the wedding dress she still wore because she hadn't had the strength to take it off. "Rachel Chewit," she choked out, terror flooding her system. "Something's wrong, the baby." Rachel was already calling 911, already grabbing Claire's hospital bag, already moving with the efficiency of crisis. Hold on, sis. Just hold on. She's going to be okay. You're both going to be okay. But as another contraction tore through her body 12 weeks too early, Claire knew nothing was going to be okay ever again. The emergency room at Mount Sinai was chaos rendered in fluorescent lighting and the smell of antiseptic. Claire lay on a gurney being rushed through corridors, monitors beeping frantically, while doctors and nurses shouted medical terminology she couldn't process through the pain and fear. Blood pressure 160 over 110 and climbing, baby's heart rate dropping down to 90, possible placental abruption. Get her to labor and delivery now. Someone page Dr. Chen. We might need an emergency C-section. Rachel gripped her hand, running alongside the gurney, tears streaming down her face. You're going to be okay. Both of you are going to be okay. Just breathe. Claire, just breathe. But Claire could feel it, the tightening, the cramping, her body trying to expel the baby 12 weeks too early. She thought of her daughter, barely 2 pounds, according to the last ultrasound, lungs unformed, not ready for the world that was trying to force her into it. Please, Claire begged the doctor with kind eyes and steady hands. Please save her. I don't care what happens to me. Just save my baby. We're doing everything we can, the doctor said. And Claire could hear the unspoken caveat, but it might not be enough. They pumped her full of drugs with names she couldn't pronounce. Magnesium sulfate to stop the contractions, the nurse explained. Though the words felt distant and unreal, steroids to accelerate the baby's lung development in case of emergency delivery, an IV of fluids because she was dehydrated from stress. Claire floated in and out of consciousness, feeling her daughter's kicks grow weaker with each passing hour. She dreamed of her father, of the way he used to read to her before bed, his voice a rumble of safety and love. She dreamed of Blake, but in her dreams his face kept changing, morphing into something monstrous and unfamiliar. She woke at dawn to the sound of steady beeping. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic sound of the fetal monitor, still registering a heartbeat, still alive. She's stable, a nurse said softly, adjusting Claire's IV with practiced efficiency. For now, but you're on strict bed rest, honey. No stress, no excitement, no getting up except to use the bathroom. Any more episodes like last night and we won't be able to stop the labor. Do you understand? Claire's hand moved to her belly. The baby responded with a faint flutter. Weak but present. I'm sorry, boy, Claire whispered to her unborn daughter. I'm so sorry I put you through this. I was trying to protect us, and she couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel appeared in the doorway with coffee and a face etched with worry and exhaustion. She'd been up all night, calling insurance companies and arguing with hospital billing. The hospital called your insurance company, Rachel said, setting down the coffee she'd probably paid too much for from the hospital cafeteria. Blake already filed a claim saying you're not covered under his plan. He's arguing you're not officially married, so you're not his dependent, so his insurance doesn't apply. What? The bill so far is $80,000. That's just for last night. If you have to stay here on bed rest, Rachel's voice cracked. Claire, we don't have that kind of money. Claire closed her eyes. Of course he had. Of course, every move calculated to destroy her, to strip away every resource, to leave her drowning and desperate. Her phone buzzed on the side table, against every ounce of better judgment. She looked. The media had gone into a feeding frenzy overnight. Headlines screamed from every major outlet, each one more vicious than the last. Jilted bride's meltdown leads to emergency hospitalization. Blake Sutton seeks professional help for fiancé's mental health crisis. Inside Claire Morrison's history of erratic behavior, former colleagues speak out. That last one quoted anonymous sources describing incidents that had never happened. A made-up assault on a former employee who'd quit after Claire had violently threatened her, claims she'd been fired from previous jobs for instability and unprofessional behavior. A former roommate who said Claire had dangerous mood swings and had once threatened to hurt herself and others. All lies. All published as fact. All impossible to disprove because the sources were anonymous. Her business Instagram had been destroyed. 2,000 comments, 99% and calling her crazy, demanding she give up the baby, threatening violence if she didn't stay away from Blake. Every client had canceled. Her website was down, overwhelmed by traffic or deliberately attacked. She couldn't tell which. Someone had filed a false claim with her business license board, accusing her of fraud and demanding an investigation. Blake Sutton had weaponized the internet against her in less than 24 hours. How do I fight this? Claire asked, voice hollow. How do I fight someone who can rewrite reality itself? Rachel had no answer. Neither of them did. The process server returned at 2 p.m. More legal documents. This time, a custody filing that made Claire's blood run cold. Blake Sutton was suing for full custody of their unborn daughter. The petition was 40 pages of character assassination dressed up as legal concern. Psychiatrists Blake had paid to diagnose Claire as bipolar. Narcissistic, a danger to herself and others, based on interviews they'd never conducted. Testimony from Jenna Pierce claiming Claire had threatened to hurt the baby to punish Blake during a phone call that had never happened. Testimony from Greg Mitchell, from Nora Sutton, from people Claire had never met, but who were willing to sign affidavits about her dangerous behavior. The court date was set for 2 weeks after her due date. By then, Blake would have had 3 months to build his case while Claire was stuck on bed rest, unable to work, unable to defend herself. He's going to take her, Claire said, not a question, a fact as undeniable as gravity. Rachel tried to argue, tried to insist they'd find a way to fight, but they both knew the truth. Blake had infinite resources and a legal team that specialized in destroying people. Claire had nothing. He'd spent months building a paper trail of her supposed instability while she'd spent months being in love, trusting him, believing in a future that had never existed. The scales weren't just unbalanced. They were broken at a fundamental level. That night, alone in her hospital room while Rachel went home to shower and change, Claire allowed herself to break completely. She sobbed until her throat was raw, until the monitors beeped warnings about her elevated heart rate, until a nurse came in with sedatives to calm her down before she triggered another preterm labor episode. I can't do this, she whispered to the darkness, to God or fate or whatever force had decided she deserved this much pain. I can't fight him. He's too strong. He has too much power. I'm going to lose everything. The baby kicked once, weak but persistent, a tiny fist or foot pressing against Claire's palm through skin and muscle. A reminder that giving up meant losing everything that truly mattered. The stranger appeared at 2 a.m. Claire was awake, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting them for the 100th time. When the hospital room door opened slowly, she tensed, expecting another process server or a hostile reporter who'd bribed their way past security. Instead, a man stepped into the dim light, tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and a distinctive scar along his jawline that caught the fluorescent glow. He wore an expensive suit but carried himself like someone who'd earned his money through work rather than inheritance. Security, Claire reached for the call button, her heart racing. Wait, his voice was calm but urgent, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Your father saved my family 15 years ago. I owe him everything, and I owe you the truth about Blake Sutton. Claire's hand hovered over the button. Who are you? Dean Hartford. I run Hartford Technologies. He pulled out his wallet, moving slowly and deliberately, showing ID and a faded photograph. 2 families at a company picnic, younger and happier. A man in his 20s standing beside Tom Morrison, both of them laughing. A teenage Claire in the background, braces and all. I don't remember you, KP, Claire said, though something about his face tugged at memory's edges. You were 18, I was 25. Your dad gave my father a manufacturing contract when no one else would. Kept our factory running through the recession when bigger companies were folding left and right. Without Tom Morrison's faith in us, my family would have lost everything. He moved closer, his expression intense with something Claire recognized as righteous anger. Blake Sutton tried to destroy my company 3 years ago. Hostile takeover attempt, smear campaign in the business press. He planted false stories about faulty products, bribed safety inspectors to file bogus reports, tried to turn our clients against us. He's not a businessman, he's a predator. And I've spent the last 3 years building a case against him. From his briefcase, he pulled a laptop, setting it gently on the rolling table beside Claire's bed. I need you to see something, and then you need to decide if you're willing to fight. The files Dean showed her were damning in ways Claire hadn't imagined possible. Forensic accounting records showing Blake had built his empire on systematic insider trading. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands laundering money through fake transactions with non-existent partners. Evidence of securities fraud going back a decade. Bribery of government officials to secure contracts. Tax evasion schemes that would make the IRS salivate. This is enough to put him away for 20 years. Claire breathed, scrolling through page after page of documented crimes. Why haven't you gone to the authorities? I tried, 3 times. Each time, the case got buried. Blake has friends in high places, judges, prosecutors, politicians he's donated to. The system protects people like him. Dean's jaw clenched. But it gets worse. He clicked to another folder, and Claire's stomach turned. Non-disclosure agreements. 5 of them, all from women Blake had gotten pregnant over the past 8 years. Claire read through them with growing horror. Payments ranging from $500,000 to $2 million. Clauses forbidding the women from ever naming Blake as the father or speaking about their relationships. Threatening language about lawsuits and reputational destruction if they violated the terms. One woman's NDA had a handwritten note in the margin. Barely legible. Subject miscarried 2 weeks after refusing initial offer. Convenient timing. Recommend increased surveillance. He's done this before, Claire said, her voice shaking. Multiple times. He gets women pregnant, uses them for whatever scheme he's running, then pays them off or intimidates them into silence. And Jenna Pierce helped him every time. She's not just his mistress or his lawyer. She's his accomplice. She drafted these NDAs. She facilitated the payments through shell companies. She's criminally liable for everything he's done. Dean's expression hardened as he pulled up another document. But there's something else. Something I only discovered last week when I finally got access to archived business filings. He showed her a document dated 10 years earlier, a business proposal titled Morrison Industries Acquisition Strategy. Claire's hands shook as she read through the 40-page plan. It was chillingly detailed and methodical. The document outlined a multi-year plan to gain control of her father's company. Phase 1 identified vulnerabilities in Morrison's board structure and financial position. Phase 2 established business relationships with key board members through charitable donations and social connections. Phase 3 eliminate primary competition through coordinated market manipulation. Phase 4 relationship with daughter. There were notes, research about Claire's interests, her career trajectory, her personality traits, a psychological profile that made her skin crawl, predicted emotional responses to different approaches, recommended tactics for building trust and dependency. He's been planning this since I was 18 years old, Claire whispered, feeling bile rise in her throat. Before we ever met, he waited. He researched me like I was a target, not a person. He engineered our entire relationship. The charity gala where you met wasn't coincidence. Blake donated $500,000 to that nonprofit specifically because you were the event planner. He'd been tracking your career for years, waiting for the right moment, waiting for you to be successful enough to be credible, but still vulnerable enough to manipulate. The room spun. Every moment of their relationship reframed itself in her mind. The way he'd accidentally bumped into her at the gala, spilling champagne on her dress and insisting on paying for the cleaning. The shared interests that had seemed so serendipitous, from obscure bands to specific authors. The pregnancy that had happened despite her being on birth control she'd taken religiously. Nothing had been real, not a single moment. She'd been a mark from the beginning. "Why are you helping me?" Claire asked, needing to understand his motivation before she could trust him. Dean was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. "Your father taught me something when I was starting out, when my company was barely surviving and I was drowning in debt and despair. He said the only way to fight monsters is to become something they can't anticipate. Not another monster, something better, something they don't have the imagination to prepare for." He met her eyes directly. "I've been building this case for 3 years, but I needed someone on the inside. Someone Blake had heard enough to fight back without hesitation. Someone he'd underestimate because he thinks he's already destroyed them." He closed the laptop. "I'm not going to lie to you, Claire. This will be brutal. Blake has resources and connections I can't match. He'll come after both of us with everything he has. But together we have something he doesn't." "What?" "The truth. Documentation he doesn't know exists. And 5 women ready to break their NDAs if you lead the charge. They've been waiting for someone brave enough to go first." Claire looked at the evidence spread across the hospital bed, at the proof of Blake's decade-long con in serial predation, at the chance to fight back and maybe, just maybe, win. She thought about her daughter, growing inside her, innocent and unaware of the war being waged over her future, about the life Blake had planned, where he controlled everything and everyone, where her child would grow up believing lies about her mother, about her father, who taught her that some fights were worth having even when the odds were impossible, even when losing seemed certain. "Tell me what to do," Claire said. "Tell me how we destroy him." The Washington Post article dropped at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the wedding that never was. The billionaire, the bride, and the con inside Blake Sutton's decade-long scheme. Marcus Cole, one of the paper's most respected investigative journalists, had spent those 3 weeks verifying every detail with the obsessive thoroughness that had won him a Pulitzer. The article was devastating. 8,000 words of documented fraud, manipulation, and systemic abuse. Photos of the Morrison acquisition strategy document, each page time-stamped and verified by forensic document experts. Interviews with 3 of the 5 women who'd signed NDAs, their faces blurred for protection, but their stories crystal clear and corroborated by bank records. Forensic accounting that traced Blake's shell companies and offshore accounts. Testimony from Dean Hartford about Blake's pattern of corporate predation. And at the center of it all, Claire Morrison's story, told in her own words, backed by screenshots and recordings and medical records from her hospitalization. By noon, the article had been shared 2 million times across every social media platform. The hashtag Justice for Claire replaced Crazy Bride NYC in the trending topics. By evening, the consequences were cascading like dominoes. Blake's stock price plummeted 40% before trading was halted. The SEC announced a formal investigation. 3 senators called for hearings. His board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting. Companies that had partnered with him rushed to issue statements distancing themselves from his actions. Claire watched it unfold from her hospital bed, still on strict bed rest, but finally feeling like she could breathe. Rachel sat beside her, reading comments aloud. "Listen to this one. I worked with Claire Morrison 3 years ago and she was nothing but professional and kind. Blake Sutton is a liar, and I'm glad the truth is finally coming out." And this, "My sister signed one of those NDAs." Seeing Claire fight back gave her the courage to break hers. "Thank you, Claire." The vindication felt surreal after weeks of being called crazy and unstable. For the first time since the wedding, people were listening, believing. The narrative had finally shifted. Her phone rang. Unknown number. But Claire answered anyway. "Miss Morrison, this is Judge Carolyn Webb. I've been assigned to review the restraining order filed against you. In light of recent revelations, I'm scheduling an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning at 9. Can you attend?" Claire looked at the IV in her arm, the fetal monitor strapped to her belly. The strict bed rest orders. "Yes," she said immediately. "Absolutely. I'll be there." The hearing the next morning was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Judge Webb, a stern woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing, reviewed the evidence Dean had compiled. She read portions of the Washington Post article aloud in court. She questioned Blake's lawyers with increasing skepticism about the discrepancies between their claims and the documented facts. Blake sat beside his attorney, face red with barely contained rage, jaw clenched so tight Claire could see the muscle jumping. This wasn't how his plan was supposed to go. "Mr. Sutton," Judge Webb said coldly, her voice cutting through the courtroom with judicial authority, "I am appalled at the abuse of this court system. This restraining order was filed in bad faith with the deliberate intent to intimidate and control Miss Morrison. It is hereby vacated immediately and completely." She turned to Claire, who sat in a wheelchair because standing for long periods risked another preterm labor episode. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a temporary injunction preventing Mr. Sutton from disposing of assets or leaving the country pending the SEC investigation. Mr. Sutton, you are ordered to maintain all financial records and make yourself available for depositions. Miss Morrison, you are free to go and free to speak publicly about your experiences." Claire walked, or rather was wheeled, out of the courthouse that day into a sea of cameras and reporters. But this time, they weren't hostile. They were hungry for her side of the story. Finally ready to listen. "Miss Morrison, how do you feel about today's ruling? What's next for you and your baby? Do you have a message for other women in similar situations?" Claire took a deep breath, Rachel's hand steady on her shoulder. She thought about everything she'd been through, everything she'd lost, and everything she was still fighting for. No woman should have to prove she's not crazy for telling the truth, Claire said, her voice steady and clear. Blake Sutton used his money and power to silence me, to discredit me, to try to take away my child. But the truth is stronger than any weapon he has. She paused, making eye contact with the cameras, knowing her words would reach beyond this courthouse to women everywhere who'd been called hysterical or unstable for speaking up. To every woman watching who's been gaslit or manipulated or told she's imagining things, I believe you. Your truth matters. Keep fighting. Don't let them silence you. And know that you're not alone. The crowd erupted in applause, genuine and thunderous, walking or being wheeled away from the courthouse that day, her sister beside her and strangers cheering her name. Claire felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe she could actually win this. She went home to the apartment that was legally hers now, one of many small victories. She ordered takeout from her favorite Thai place. She video called the 5 women who'd broken their NDAs, and they cried together and laughed together and started planning their class action lawsuit together. She slept through the night for the first time since the wedding, her hand on her belly and her daughter's kicks strong and steady. She let herself believe she'd won. That was her mistake. Tessa Kramer was waiting in Claire's apartment when she came home from a doctor's appointment 2 days later. Claire found her best friend of 10 years sitting on the couch, looking nervous but determined. For a moment, relief flooded through her system like a drug. Tessa had been radio silent since the wedding, and Claire had assumed she'd been scared off by the media circus or didn't know what to say. Tessa? Claire moved to hug her as much as her 8-month pregnant belly allowed. Thank God, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I was so worried. I thought maybe Blake had... Tessa stood but didn't return the embrace. She took a step back, maintaining distance. Claire, we need to talk. Something in her tone made Claire's stomach drop. Something cold and final. What's wrong? Are you okay? Tessa pulled out her phone with hands that weren't shaking at all, opened a recording app with deliberate precision. The timestamp showed it had been running for the past 5 minutes, recording everything Claire had said since walking through the door. Everything you just said about Dean Hartford's evidence, Tessa said quietly, matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. Blake's paying me $500,000 for it. The world tilted on its axis. What? You really thought I was your friend? Tessa's voice was almost bored, clinical in its detachment. Blake and I have been in together for 3 years. Before you, long before Jenna. Jenna was always just the distraction, the obvious affair for you to discover. I'm the real endgame. Claire couldn't breathe, couldn't process. The room spun. Tessa, her best friend since college, her maid of honor, the woman who'd held her hair back during morning sickness and helped her pick out baby names and cried with her when she found out the baby was a girl. You were at my father's funeral, Claire whispered, memories reshaping themselves into something hideous. Blake sent me, 10 years ago, to get close to you, to report back on your emotional state, your vulnerabilities, your daily habits, your fears and dreams and secrets. Every secret you told me over coffee or wine or late-night phone calls went straight to him within hours. Tessa stepped closer, and Claire could finally see the truth in her eyes. Cold calculation, no remorse, no conflict. Just a woman who'd been playing a role for a decade and was tired of the performance. The birth control you were on, I replaced your pills with placebos 6 months before you got pregnant. Blake wanted a baby to lock in the board support, but it needed to seem natural, unplanned. You were always so careful about taking that pill every morning. Made it easy. Claire's knees buckled. Rachel, who'd been in the kitchen making tea, caught her before she hit the floor. You're a monster, Rachel hissed, helping Claire to a chair. You're a genuine monster. I'm pragmatic. Tessa was already texting, her fingers flying across the screen. And now I have everything Blake needs to destroy Dean Hartford's case. Recorded admission that you two coordinated to fabricate evidence, that you knew the NDAs were legally binding, but convinced those women to break them anyway. That's conspiracy. Claire, that's witness tampering. That's a federal crime that will put you in prison and guarantee Blake gets custody. She looked up from her phone, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed her face, not regret, satisfaction. You should have taken Nora's offer. 10 million and a clean exit. Instead, you chose pride. This is what pride costs. Within an hour, the consequences materialized with horrifying speed. Blake's lawyers filed a new motion. Defamation lawsuit against both Claire Morrison and Dean Hartford. $100 million in damages. Subpoenas for all of Dean's evidence. Now tied up in legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. A motion to dismiss the SEC investigation based on alleged evidence tampering and conspiracy. A new restraining order, this time with teeth. Claire couldn't speak publicly about Blake at all. Any interviews, any social media posts, any statements to the press would result in immediate arrest in an emergency custody hearing where her recorded confession of evidence tampering would be Exhibit A. The judge who signed it was different from Judge Webb. This one had been photographed golfing with Blake's father at an exclusive club. This one had received donations from Blake's foundation for his re-election campaign. Dean called that evening, his voice tight with suppressed rage that Claire had never heard from him before. He's buried us in motions. Every piece of evidence I have is now subject to discovery and authentication challenges. My company's assets are frozen fighting his lawsuit. My lawyers say this could take 3 to 5 years to resolve through the courts. I don't have 3 years, Claire said, her voice hollow. Her due date was 8 weeks away. He's going to take my daughter. I know, I'm sorry, and I thought we could. It's not your fault, it's mine. I trusted the wrong person. Again. She hung up and stared at the ceiling of Rachel's tiny one-bedroom apartment, where she was now staying because Blake had filed liens on her business and frozen her accounts while the defamation lawsuit was pending. Everything she'd built, every small victory, obliterated in a single day because she'd trusted someone who'd been working against her for a decade. The worst part was the voice in her head that sounded disturbingly like Nora Sutton. Maybe he's right. Maybe you are too broken and damaged to win. Maybe the best thing for your daughter is to let her go to someone stronger. Claire pressed her palms against her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks, and tried to silence that voice, but it was getting harder every day. The next 6 weeks were a slow descent into hell dressed up as normal life. Blake filed for full custody before the baby was even born. His legal team moving with surgical precision. His petition painted Claire as destitute, mentally unstable, living in squalor with her sister in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, unsuitable for a child. He had psychiatrists ready to testify to diagnoses they'd made without ever meeting her. Character witnesses lined up like dominoes. Financial experts prepared to show she couldn't provide even basic necessities. Claire's bank accounts remained frozen pending the defamation lawsuit. Her business was destroyed beyond recovery, clients having fled to competitors who weren't embroiled in scandal. Rachel had maxed out 3 credit cards just to keep them fed and pay for the medical bills insurance wouldn't cover. Dean's assets were locked up fighting Blake's lawsuit. The few lawyers who'd offered to help pro bono backed away when Blake's firm threatened to file bar complaints and sue them personally for tortious interference. At 32 weeks pregnant, Claire was broke, blacklisted, trapped, and running out of options. Then Nora Sutton made her final offer. She arrived at Rachel's apartment in a town car worth more than the building, dripping diamonds and contempt like she'd been born to them, which Claire supposed she had been. $10 million, Nora said without preamble, sliding a leather folder across the scratched kitchen table. You give birth in a private facility of our choosing, sign custody to Blake immediately after delivery, and disappear. You'll be comfortable for life. The baby will want for nothing. Claire stared at the contract inside. The number was real. $10 million. More money than she'd see in 3 lifetimes of working. Blake will marry someone suitable. Nora continued, her voice the practiced efficiency of old money, solving problems. Someone from the right background who understands expectations. Your daughter will grow up with every advantage. Private schools in Switzerland, trust funds, a real family with connections and influence. She laid out glossy photos like playing cards, beautiful estates in Connecticut in the Hamptons, elite prep schools with 100-year waiting lists that wouldn't apply to a Sutton, everything money could buy. What can you offer her? Claire, really, scraping by in a one-bedroom apartment you don't even own, fighting legal battles you can't win, Working jobs that won't hire you because one Google search shows you're the crazy bride from New York. Nora leaned forward, and her expression might have been mistaken for kindness by someone who didn't know better. Be honest with yourself. Maybe loving her means letting her go. Maybe the best thing you can do for your daughter is give her the life you never had. The stability, the security, the future. She stood to leave, smoothing her designer skirt with manicured hands. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, we take her anyway through the courts, and you get nothing, not even the dignity of choosing. Nora left the contract on the table. Claire looked at it for 3 days straight, picked it up, put it down, did the math, calculated how long 10 million could last if she invested wisely, how many women it could help through the nonprofit she'd never get to build now, how many legal battles she could fund for others even if she couldn't win her own, how easy it would be to sign away her daughter and end the pain. She was lying awake at 3 in the morning, the contract mocking her from the coffee table. When she saw it, an old photo on her phone, one she'd looked at 1,000 times without really seeing, her father's funeral, 10 years ago, Claire in a black dress looking devastated, surrounded by mourners. And in the background, barely visible in the crowd, easily missed Tessa Kramer talking to Blake Sutton. Not meeting for the first time, talking like they knew each other. Tessa's hand on Blake's arm in a gesture of familiarity. Blake's head bent close to hers like they were sharing secrets. They'd known each other then, a decade ago, before Claire had even met Blake. Before the whole con began, her hands shook as she zoomed in on every photo from that day, finding 2 more shots of them together. One where Blake was handing Tessa what looked like a business card, another where they were both looking directly at Claire, who'd been oblivious to their attention. This wasn't about the Morrison Industries merger, at least not entirely. This was older, deeper, more calculated than even she'd imagined. She called Dean at 1 in the morning, not caring if she woke him. Blake tried to acquire my father's company 10 years ago. Didn't he? Not 8 years ago when the documents show. 10, silence on the other end. Then yes, the first attempt was 10 years ago, right before your father died. The board rejected him unanimously. Your father led the opposition, called Blake a vulture, and said he'd never let someone like that touch Morrison Industries while he was alive. And 6 months later, my father died in a factory accident. Claire, was it really an accident? Dean. The silence stretched so long, Claire thought the call had dropped. I don't know, Dean finally said, his voice heavy with implications he couldn't voice. But I've always wondered. The safety inspection reports from that day had irregularities. The equipment that failed had been inspected 2 weeks earlier and passed. Your father was experienced, careful. The accident seemed unlikely. Get me everything from that period, factory inspection reports, insurance claims, police reports, witness statements, everything that exists. What are you thinking? Claire felt something crystallize inside her. Not hope, it's calling, something colder and sharper and more dangerous. I'm thinking Blake Sutton has been playing a 10-year game, and I'm finally seeing the whole board. Every piece he's moved, every sacrifice he's made, every rule he's broken. She looked at the contract on the coffee table, then at the photo of her father with Blake and Tessa in the background. And I'm thinking it's time to stop playing his game and start playing mine. Claire went into labor during Blake's press conference. He'd called it for 2 p.m. on a Friday, prime news cycle time, to announce his amicable settlement with Claire Morrison. A carefully worded statement his PR team had spent days crafting, painting himself as the magnanimous victim who was offering support for his mentally ill ex-fiancée while taking custody of their daughter for everyone's safety and well-being. The media had gathered at his company's headquarters, cameras set up in rows, reporters from every major outlet, Blake at a podium, confidence radiating from every pore, wearing his most trustworthy suit. That's when Claire's video started streaming. Rachel had set it up perfectly, using Dean's tech connections to push it simultaneously to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. The algorithms picked it up immediately, flagging it as trending content. Claire, 9 months pregnant and in active labor, sitting in the back of an ambulance with its doors open. My name is Claire Morrison, she said, breathing through a contraction that made her pause mid-sentence. And Blake Sutton has been planning to destroy my family for 10 years. She held up the documents Dean had found, courtesy of a private investigator who'd spent 3 weeks digging through archived records. The original Morrison acquisition strategy from a decade ago, dated and notarized, but also new evidence they'd uncovered. Factory inspection reports showing someone had tampered with safety equipment the week before her father's death. The inspector who'd signed off on the equipment had deposited $50,000 in his account the next day, traced back to one of Blake's shell companies. Insurance claims filed by a company that didn't exist, owned by Blake's father. Police reports that had been buried, questions that had never been asked. Blake Sutton didn't just con me, Claire said, her voice shaking but clear. I believe he killed my father, and I have evidence that suggests it wasn't an accident. The live stream viewers spiked. 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 people watching a pregnant woman in labor accuse a billionaire of murder. I have proof he's been using our daughter as a cover for embezzling funds from Morrison Industries. There's an offshore account in her name that she doesn't know about. Her social security number, obtained before she was even born, was used to open shell companies. If I give up custody, I look complicit. If I keep her, he controls me forever through custody battles and legal threats. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Claire gasped but kept talking, kept looking at the camera. He built the perfect trap, every move calculated. But here's what Blake Sutton didn't anticipate. She looked directly into the camera lens, directly at the millions of people now watching. I'm not playing his game anymore. FBI agents are receiving these documents as I speak. The SEC has been briefed by attorneys working pro bono. 3 forensic accountants have verified the financial evidence, and the 5 women who signed NDAs, they're filing a class action lawsuit today with a law firm that specializes in taking down powerful men. We're not alone anymore. We're an army. At his press conference, Blake's carefully constructed moment was dissolving into chaos. Someone's phone had picked up the live stream. It spread through the room like wildfire, reporters shouting questions. His lawyer trying to pull him away from the microphone. His prepared statement forgotten. Miss Morrison is clearly in distress, Blake sputtered, his famous composure cracking into something ugly. This is exactly the kind of dangerous episode we've been concerned about. She needs immediate psychiatric help, not FBI. Blake Sutton, you're under arrest. 2 agents appeared from the side of the room, moving with the authority of federal law enforcement. Blake's face cycled through emotions in rapid succession, confident to confused to shocked to enraged. You can't do this. I have rights. I have lawyers. I'll sue every one of you. So did she, Mr. Sutton. The agent snapped handcuffs on his wrist with professional efficiency. You're being charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, embezzlement, and we'll be investigating the suspicious death of Thomas Morrison. You have the right to remain silent. But Blake didn't see the rest. He was screaming about wrongful arrest, about persecution, about how this was all a conspiracy by his business rivals. No one was listening anymore. Claire didn't see any of it. She was in the hospital, on her back, pushing with everything she had left. Rachel held one hand, a nurse held the other. Dean had sent an enormous bouquet of flowers that arrived just as she went into delivery. The card reading, "Your father would be so proud." The 5 women who'd broken their NDAs had sent a joint gift, a silver bracelet engraved with "Never Broken." At 3:47 a.m., after 14 hours of labor, Ruby Morrison was born. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect fingers and perfect toes and perfect lungs that announced her arrival with a furious cry. Claire held her daughter and sobbed. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. Not from exhaustion, though she'd never been more tired. From relief, from joy, from the overwhelming weight of survival and victory and the impossible realization that she'd actually won. "No one will ever take you from me," she whispered against Ruby's tiny head, breathing in that indescribable newborn smell. "I promise, I promise, I promise." Ruby opened her eyes, dark and unfocused but searching, and made a small sound that might have been agreement. Claire had never heard anything more beautiful in her entire life. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed for Blake Sutton's sentencing hearing. Claire sat in the front row, Ruby sleeping peacefully in a carrier against her chest. At 6 months old, Ruby had her mother's hazel eyes and what looked like it might be her grandfather's stubborn chin. She was healthy and happy and completely oblivious to the gravity of the moment. Rachel sat on one side, Dean Hartford on the other. He'd flown in from San Francisco, where his company was thriving again, now that Blake's lawsuit had been dismissed with prejudice and Blake's assets seized. Behind them sat the 5 women who'd broken their NDAs, whose class action lawsuit had just settled for $80 million split between them. Not just compensation, but vindication. Proof that speaking truth to power could actually work. The courtroom filled with reporters, victims of Blake's other scheme, and curious onlookers who'd followed the case from that viral wedding video to this final chapter. Judge Webb presided, her expression stern as she reviewed the sentencing recommendations. Blake looked smaller now, diminished in an orange jumpsuit instead of custom suits. His hair was longer, unkempt. The arrogance had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Almost. The charges had piled up during the 6-month investigation like snow in a blizzard. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, embezzlement, obstruction of justice. And though they couldn't prove murder without more evidence, the suspicious circumstances of Tom Morrison's death had been enough to add manslaughter charges that Blake's lawyers had convinced him to accept as part of a plea deal. Jenna Pierce had flipped early, offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years. She'd given them everything: the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the bribes, the threats. Every skeleton in Blake's closet exposed to daylight. Tessa Kramer was still awaiting trial, held without bail as a flight risk, facing conspiracy and fraud charges that could put her away for a decade. Nora Sutton had cut Blake off completely, issued a statement through her lawyers disowning him and protecting the family fortune from his creditors and victims. "Blake Sutton," Judge Webb said, her voice carrying the weight of justice finally served. "You have used your wealth and position to harm countless people over more than a decade. You have shown no genuine remorse, no accountability, and no humanity. The court has reviewed your psychological evaluation and finds you to be a calculating predator who views other people as objects to be used and discarded." She paused, looking directly at him. "I am sentencing you to 18 years in federal prison for the financial crimes, to be served consecutively with 8 years for the manslaughter charge. That's 26 years total. Given your age, this effectively means you will spend the rest of your productive life incarcerated." Blake's face twisted with rage. "This is a witch hunt. She fabricated everything. I'm the victim here. That woman destroyed my life." "Mr. Sutton, you destroyed your own life the moment you decided other people existed solely for your benefit." "Bailiff, remove him." But Blake's voice carried as they dragged him toward the door. "You haven't won, Claire. I'll appeal. I'll get out and I'll take everything from you. You're nothing without me." "Nothing." The door closed on his threats. The courtroom exhaled collectively. Claire felt Rachel's arm around her shoulders, felt Ruby's tiny hand grip her finger, felt the weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift. Outside, she gave one final statement to the press gathered on the courthouse steps. Ruby was awake now, looking around with curious eyes at all the cameras and people. "This was never about revenge," Claire said, one hand cradling her daughter's head. "It was about protecting my child and honoring my father's memory. Blake Sutton stole years from me. He stole my father, but he doesn't get to steal her future." Ruby yawned, tiny and perfect, and unaware that she was the reason her mother had fought so hard. "I want every woman watching to know you don't have to be perfect to be believed. You don't have to have unlimited resources to fight back. You just have to tell the truth and refuse to be silent, even when silence seems safer. Especially then." The cameras loved it. The soundbite would play on every news channel for days. But Claire was already done with the media circus, done with the spotlight. She had better things to do. She'd taken back Morrison Industries with the board's enthusiastic support, the men who'd known her father welcoming her as the CEO she'd never planned to become. Under her leadership, the company was thriving, modernized and ethical, creating jobs instead of destroying them. She'd started a foundation with her share of the class action settlement, helping women escape financial abuse and predatory relationships. The Morrison Foundation for Economic Justice had already helped 300 women rebuild their lives. Her book, The Long Con: How I Survived a Decade-Long Scheme, would be published next month. Every penny of profit designated for the foundation. She'd built an empire from ruins, brick by brick, truth by truth. That evening, Claire visited her father's grave with Ruby bundled against the autumn chill. "We did it, Dad," she said softly, settling onto the grass beside the headstone. "Saved the company. Stopped Blake. Just like you would have wanted." Ruby made a cooing sound, reaching toward the engraved letters of her grandfather's name. "She has your determination. I think, your sense of right and wrong." Claire smiled, tears in her eyes but happy ones. "And I'll teach her everything you taught me. That the truth is stronger than any lie. That justice is worth fighting for even when it seems impossible. That power isn't about money or control." She stood, adjusting Ruby in her arms. "It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away." The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and red and purple, beautiful and defiant. Claire Morrison walked back to her car, her daughter secure in her arms, and drove home. Not to a palace or a penthouse or any of the things Blake's money could have bought. To a modest house in her Ohio hometown, the same streets where she'd grown up, where neighbors still knew her name and her father's legacy lived on in the factory that still employed 200 families. Sometimes, she thought, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something beautiful from the ashes and refusing to become the monster who tried to break you. Claire had survived. She'd won. And more importantly, she'd remained herself through all of it. That was enough. That was everything. Blake Sutton is currently serving his 26-year sentence at FCI Cumberland. His first parole hearing is scheduled for 2037. Jenna Pierce is serving 5 years at FCI Danbury. Tessa Kramer was sentenced to 12 years. Claire Morrison is CEO of Morrison Industries, which posted record profits this year and was named one of the most ethical companies in America. Ruby Morrison is thriving at 6 months old, surrounded by love and security. Dean Hartford's company has partnered with Morrison Industries on 6 major projects. The 5 women who broke their NDAs have all rebuilt their lives and regularly speak at Claire's Foundation events. The Morrison Foundation has helped over 800 women escape financial abuse and predatory relationships. Claire's book became a New York Times bestseller, with all proceeds funding the foundation's work. Blake Sutton has filed 4 appeals. All have been denied. The truth always wins. It just takes time and courage and people willing to stand up when silence seems safer. This is the story Claire tells Ruby every night, in age-appropriate versions. So her daughter grows up knowing you are never powerless. You always have your voice, and sometimes speaking up changes everything.